Welcome back, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm super excited for today. I actually have stuff I want to look at, and honestly, the stuff we're probably going to look at for the next several streams. Um, if y'all missed it, Android has a new extended reality platform out there. I should even just drop these docs in here. Why aren't you expanding? Let me go ahead and drop these in the chat. This was announced last week on Thursday. Yeah, super exciting stuff. It is basically a open, I don't know how open, I guess, but it is basically a platform for extended reality built on top of Android that is meant to run on currently headsets, but in the future, like augmented reality glasses and things like that as well. Um, but it's super cool, and I guess you could kind of, at a high level, think of this as like Android's competitor to the Apple Vision Pro. Um, but really thinking about this framework as something that's going to expand to so much more than that because it's not limited to just one device or even one type of device. And I think that's really exciting because by making a sort of open platform like this, similar to Android, I think that we'll end up seeing some really cool things in these sort of extended reality um, space. Also, if you're unfamiliar with like XR, it's basically just a way to encapsulate, say, virtual reality, which is what we know as like the full immersive headsets, and say augmented reality, which is something like Google Glass or like the Meta Ray-Bans, for example. This is a way of just grouping all of those sorts of modified realities under uh, one umbrella. But the reason I think that's so exciting is because, like we've seen with Android phones and how we can have different manufacturers building for Android and trying to compete with each other and how that drives prices down, I think that maybe we'll see something like that happen with the extended reality space. And that would be really cool because it's no secret that a lot of virtual reality headsets price people out of being able to use them. Um, Whether or not this will inherently solve that problem, I have no idea. We did see last week we saw an unveiling of the first headset that will feature Android XR, which is a device from Samsung, and I have no idea what price it is. So I could be making this up, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, you know, broader competition in the future and that making it more accessible. I'd really hope so. Um, Nice. So with that, where are we going to start with all this? Because that's a lot. This is a huge bombshell. Well, I guess let's talk about where this stands today. So, great banner right here at the top to call this out for me. The Android XR SDK is now available in developer preview. Um, so basically they want our feedback. They have a whole support page, which I definitely recommend checking out, which has information on bug reporting, issue reporting for Android Studio or the emulator or the libraries. This is a great place to go and provide that feedback. But as always, Android is kind of built on the community that uses it. When you get involved with tooling this early on, it may seem kind of silly because, like, no, this is not stable to use in production or anything like that, but you can really help shape um, the APIs and things like that for other people. You can have really positive benefits. So that's something I'd hope to kind of accomplish, but also I'm just really giddy about the idea of XR now. So I'm also digging into it in that regard. Um, but so, because it's in developer preview, we can't expect a whole lot of, um, let's say, like functionality and capabilities for us yet, but there is a good amount to get started with. And one of the ways to test that out is the Android team released their own XR samples, which I think is really just one app right now, but who knows, maybe they'll add more as time goes. But it's a great way to play around with some of the APIs. And I thought that's what we can do tonight instead of looking, um, reading through the documentation, which is really helpful when something new comes out. Maybe not the most exciting thing. So why don't we take their sample app, run it? We can play around with it, and then as we play around with it, we can try to compare that to the code that exists inside the sample and learn how it goes. And then in a future stream, which I'm able to commit to, I just don't know what time, but because I'm off work on Monday, I'm thinking on Monday we'll do a daytime longer stream where we either build an app for XR and or take an existing app and see how it works um, on an XR device and see how we can customize it. We'll probably do something like that. But tonight we'll focus around the sample and just learning some of the fundamentals of building for Android XR. So that's my plan. That's my long spiel. That was several minutes. I don't know how long I've been live now, but um, having gone through all that, let's dive in. So a couple things to note here. I've actually cloned this. Um, Hi, Platypus, how are you? I miss you. Hope you're doing well. Um, and you can absolutely interrupt. Why would I go live if I didn't want to talk to people? Um, the only thing to note about using XR is I think you have to be, I don't know this for sure, but I think you have to be on the Canary version of Android Studio to get access to the XR device emulator. Now, I've already gone through and created that because that takes some time, but if you want to make your own, you can go into Create Virtual Device, select XR, and right now there is only one option, but you can build it up. So, having done all that, let's run this and see what it looks like. I already got some red. It looked like it worked fine though. We'll see. Um, the only thing I have noticed that I don't love is that the XR device emulator does not like pin itself inside Android Studio, which is fine, um, but just something we'll have to work with. And here it is. Um, the app did not start, or I'm missing something. Wait, here we go. Is it slow? Am I missing something? Let me run this again, sorry. Oh, maybe the SDK location is a problem. Um, uh, why? I guess that makes sense. Um, I thought this got added automatically. Oh, because there is no local.properties file. I thought Android added those for us automatically. Okay, let's just steal this from another project real quick. Sorry about that. There we go. Build successful. All right, now we can see it. So, unfortunately, I don't, as you could tell, I do not have access to a fancy headset. But maybe one day. Let's see if we can make this a little bigger as well. Um, but we can see our app here. Um, if I click and drag, I can move around the window as if I was picking up the window on like a VR headset. I can come over here, I can grow or shrink the app. And we can see it is adaptive. Nice that we see the primary content here, but if we go up, we saw more. I can, what else have I learned? This little icon here is drag mouse to rotate. This is if I want to simulate turning my head. So, on a VR headset, we could spin and look around. I have, complete 180 vision here. Um, yo, Canawish, thank you for the follow. We could turn that off. What is this one? I don't remember everything. Reset position. That centers. And then this is cool. You can change the environment mode. The reason we might do something like this. So here, this is kind of like this naturescape, as we can see. We can change this to, I see. So this is like if there's, I believe this is pass through off. Right. Okay, that's a better way to explain it. Pass through, you can see that hover come up. Basically means can I see what's on the outside of my headset for a mixed reality experience? Right now, pass through is off. It's as if I'm in the desert completely. But with pass through on, maybe I think it's like an office setting. Oh God. All right. Well, that happens when you're using a developer preview. I have no idea why it crashed. If that keeps happening, maybe we'll get those logs and report that. Um, should have expected some of that to come up. Let's restart. But pass through is like, can I see the space around me for like a mixed reality experience? So I believe in the emulator with pass through on, what you see is you actually end up in like an office setting. Um, yes. And so this would be like, what this is to simulate what it would look like if I was using this, say, in my actual room. Now, another benefit of this in the emulator is there are actual like surfaces in here. So this is like a little table. So if I was building something where I wanted to say like, maybe they have it in their samples. Um, I know this was like a classic example of but let's say I was building like a VR like shopping app, right? And I could have like a shoe and I wanted to set that down on like the table. I could like anchor it to this table. That's like the benefit of using this part of the emulator, but um, we won't worry about that right now. So that's the emulator. What else have I learned about this that I can show off? Um, there are two types of modes that your application can be in. So, for example, will this work? Right. So here I can have, maybe the emulator doesn't play super well with this, but in here, what we call home space mode, you can have multiple applications open. So sort of the traditional like advertisements you see for like the Apple Vision Pro and things like that is you could have like, your app here, you could have, a Chrome window over here, you could have a YouTube video playing over there. Um, that's what home space mode is. And then what they call full space mode is when your app is a single focus, it's much larger and it takes up the full, not like your full vision. Well, it can if you set that up to have like a full three-dimensional space. But the idea is it would be the sole focus. So here, hovering over this would take us into that full space mode. And now we can see this got a lot larger to take up more of our space. And you'll notice it adapted accordingly in that we have like some floating buttons over here. We have um, the input pulled out into its own little pane. These side components are each their own thing, and we'll look in the code at how they pulled this off. But um, you can see how in full space mode we might tweak um, tweak that UI a little bit. Um, and I had some great ideas for this, which is something I think we'll look at in Monday's stream. I don't know what these buttons are over here. Let's see if we can learn that. So, ooh, it changes our background for us. Oh, I guess that is similar to the pass-through thing that we looked at before, where I can change this from pass-through or no pass-through. Ah, so that'll be cool to know. So even within, so the emulator itself, I can customize the mode, but it looks like I could do that through this app directly. So if this looks like this little field is probably a virtual space that maybe exists inside the sample somewhere. If I had to guess, we'll find it. But that's a rundown of the emulator. And what is this one? Oh, pan. It's like I want to move around. Um, I think the only other thing is we can have inputs here. Um, I don't know what typing would be like on a um, real device yet. I don't know if it would be painful, like click and tap on everything, or I do believe you could probably, you know, add some sort of Bluetooth keyboard if you plan to do a lot of typing. But I did notice it looks like we get like a little toast pop up saying searching is not good. Ooh, I like this keyboard thing. It's like its own thing we can use. It's got an emoji picker and everything. That's cool. Ooh, to select the suggestion, first press and hold the Alt key. Yeah, neat. Um, okay, so that's the emulator. That's the sample app, at least using it anyways. So let's look at the code. Um, there's a lot going on here already. Oh, those are screenshot tests. All right, let's look at assets to see if there is something. Okay, so I don't know a ton. I'm just gonna throw this disclaimer out here right away. I don't know a whole lot about 3D development of any kind. Um, so that's one of the reasons I think this is kind of cool is you can take like a 2D phone application and run it in this space. Maybe I'll show a demo of that in a second as well. Um, but that's one of the cool things I guess I should have called out. If you are building an Android app, your app will already be supported on Android XR. So by default, you will get just a two-dimensional version of your application. So if you think about it, what we see here is not any different than what a tablet app might look like. So this is kind of what you could expect your applications to look like. Now, all of this full space stuff is sort of XR specific stuff, but out of the box, any app should work on this, which is pretty cool. Um, I forgot why I went on that tangent. Maybe I just wanted to call that out. But like I said, I don't know a lot about 3D development in general, but I know there are file frameworks that are basically used for that sort of immersive view. So when I look at assets and I see this Green Hills mipmap.glb, whatever GLB is, um, that's what I imagine this is. That file format, I have no idea how they generate it, if this is like from a 3D picture or what, but I imagine that virtual asset is what we're using here. So I'd imagine if I wanted to do some other VR space, I would use some file like that. Um, I don't think we need to worry about resources here. Um, so let's look at where do we want to start? Yo, Amy Zepp, thank you for the sub. Um, why didn't, oh, there it goes. It did change. Um, hope you're having a great time. Thanks for stopping by. And now we are in light mode, courtesy of Amy, because every sub switches the device theme of my laptop. So if you've been flash bombed, you can go ahead and subscribe or gift a sub, and it'll send it back to dark mode automatically. Um, but let's see, where do we want to start with all this? Why don't we start? Let's start at the main activity here. There's only a handful of files here, which is pretty cool. But let's start with the main activity because I think this is really cool to show that like it's the standard activity we're used to for creating Android apps. We've got our onCreate, we've got edge to edge enabled. We call set content for composable content. We use our Hello Android XR theme, and then we render our application. Our Hello Android XR theme is um, just a standard material theme, very similar to what you get in the out of the box template. Actually, it looks like they left in some of the template code here, because I know that's what it looks like. So I'm not worried about the theme. But let's look at the Hello Android XR app. Oh my god, and we've got a lot going on in this file. So why don't we, I guess, just go through it. I wonder if it would make sense to look at the components first, but maybe not. Why don't we look at we'll start at the entry point and work our way down. But if anyone sees something that you're like, hey, what does that mean? And we want to like dig into that a little further, we can. But so here's our entry point, and we can already see we've got one if statement that's worth talking about, which is local spatial capabilities.current is spatial UI enabled. And if that's true, we draw a spatial layout. Else, we do a non-spatial two-pane layout. So let's compare this to our emulator because I think this is a good way to understand this. So what is spatial UI? Well, let's start by checking, the docs on this. Indicates whether the application may create spatial UI elements, e.g. spatial panel. This is a state-based value that should trigger recomposition in composable functions. So, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's a difference. So if we look at this, so I'm pretty sure this means like here, when we're in this full space mode, spatial UI is enabled, and that's why we see them as separate panels entirely. But I think when we're in this space, I'm pretty sure this home space, this means spatial UI is not enabled. Um, so I think the way I interpret this is spatial layout is that full screen separated panels, but this non-spatial layout is a 2D version that probably runs on a phone. And actually, maybe for fun, we can also spin up an emulator so we can also compare um, like a physical device to what we're a phone device rather to what we're seeing in like the XR emulator just for fun. Um, I love that thing. Yeah, so this seems like it's the same thing that's appearing on the tablet. It's just a little different when it's in oof. It does not scroll in this point. Maybe it shouldn't. Okay, but that kind of answers my question. Um, so if we go into non-spatial two-pane layout just for a second, I assume there's not a whole lot that we need to investigate here. Layout that displays content in its two-pane layout should be used when spatial UI is not enabled. So this is literally just, it's got a column, it's got our top app bar with a little spacer. If we're a compact device, it's a top and bottom pane layout, which is what we see here. Um, Otherwise, it's a side-by-side pane layout. So I'm going to skip a deep dive into the non-spatial layout because that is probably some phone UI development that we're used to. Um, but this is how you can check that. If you want to know if you should use um, an XR specific, um, I guess, components and stuff like that, this is where you would start this local spatial capabilities.current. Also, where is this coming from? I never called that out. Um, but if it's not obvious or expected, um, there are specific dependencies for, where is it at? Um, for XR stuff. So there's uh, android.xr.compose, there's android.xr AR core, we have scene core. I don't remember all the differences between um, AR core and scene core, but we could find them. XR Compose has some built-in components. There's also, I don't know if we'll get to see it today, there are special material design wrappers for um, Android XR if you are using the um, alpha versions of material design. But if we don't get to that today, we'll come back to it. Um, so let's look at spatial layout. All right, layout that displays content in spatial panels should be used when spatial UI is enabled. We've got our primary content, our first supporting content, and our second supporting content. So this is like a standard slot-based layout that you've probably seen if you've used like a material design scaffold or some of the material design components like a toolbar, for example, will have slot-based layouts. We've got animated alpha. which is looks like it starts at 0.5 and this animates to 1. So I guess the idea, maybe this is not obvious to me, but it starts like half. Oh my God, I hate that this full space is like too big for the emulator. Uh, it looks like it like starts at like half transparency and then animates in. It's very quick and subtle, but okay. And then we've got subspace. So I might click into these and try to understand what each thing is. So subspace creates a 3D area that the app can render spatial content into. If this is the topmost subspace in the compose hierarchy, then this will expand to fill all of the available space and will not be bound by its containing shadow. If this is nested within another subspace, then it will lay out its content in the x and y directions according to the layout logic of its parent in 2D space. It will be constrained in the z direction according to the constraints imposed by its containing subspace. Also, a no-op and does not render anything in non-XR environments, which is good to know. So I don't fully understand the whole nested subspace thing, but maybe later that's something we can like play around with to try to understand. Um, Also, why do I keep losing where I'm at? Um, oh yeah, why is this reopening here and not in a new tab? Because that's what I want it to do. Is this an Android Studio setting? Um, does anyone know the answer to that? Not open in. Go to. I don't know what the command's called. All right, maybe we can go back to it. Oh, okay. But anyway, so we create this 3D subspace, I guess. This is probably, it sounds like this is to create a 3D area that the app can render. This sounds like this is something that we have to expect that we will always need. Um, but then we've got spatial row, spatial column. I think the way to think about these is the same way we think of any other row and column, but just that by being called a spatial row, um, it is basically sort of meant to be a three-dimensional version, and I imagine it's what handles some of the um, just making sure they get like a line next to each other, even as I rotate around, because you can see they are separate items, but they still align with each other. So where were we? So we've got a row, it's got a fixed height, and then we've got a column which has spatial panel for the first supporting content and second supporting content. So the way to think about this one, this little column right here, that is these two things right here. So this makes sense, each one inside a spatial panel, which is a spatial panel is just the way I would think about that is it's like a card component for 3D space. So spatial panel is basically like a card, um, but it's a self-contained container. Like it's an isolated container in a 3D space. So we've got that column, which is those two items, and then we have another spatial panel. I don't love these like fixed widths here, but I also don't know in like an XR device what else they should be. Um, but this is another spatial panel with uses our alpha. Also, I noticed if it's a spatial component, it has its own. Yeah, I was just about to say that out loud. Quite annoying that it uses a different modifier class. Um, this gives me the same vibes as like using glance, which has like a glance modifier. Um, like I get it and I don't. Um, I get that it is a separate artifact, but you can have scope based modifiers, right? Um, for example, like if I have a modifier for aligning, I have to be in like a box or a row scope. Like, why can't I have like a spatial scope modifier? Or like why can't I have things that are just within subspace? But maybe there's a more technical reason under the hood that makes it a little more complicated, but I agree. Not the most fun thing. But this is really interesting, and this gets to another part of XR that we didn't get to talk about. So we've looked at like the subspace and then making the spatial rows and columns, and then we can have our own spatial panel, which is its own thing. But then look at this. So inside our spatial panel, we have a column which has a top app bar, and then we've got a row, which is our primary content. I don't know why that's a row. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't seem like it has to be. But a couple questions here. Where the hell did this come from? Why is this top bar separate from the primary content? Why does it look like it's not in the same spatial panel? Because here, it looks like they should be. Great question, chat. Can't believe you asked that. Let's dive into that. I think the magic for all that is going to happen in top app bar. Yes. So this is actually really cool. So this top app bar contains controls that decompose into orbiters when spatial UI is enabled. What the hell is an orbiter? Orbiter is a fantastic name for when you have basically a piece of content that sits outside of the rest of the container. Um, so because it's almost as if this like search input is orbiting the primary content, just like this one is orbiting it. So another way to think about this is like if we had a navigation rail, for example, maybe instead of the navigation rail being tied to this container, the buttons would exist in their own little space, and that would also be an orbiter. Fantastic name. Um, but I want to figure out why is this not the same top app bar that exists in the two pane layout? I want to go back and look at that because our two pane layout had a search input, didn't it? Um, so I want to go look at that real quick. Yeah, it did. It uses the same top app bar. So let's look at how top app bar is implemented then. So horizontal arrangement, space between makes sense. Um, we start with so this is a row. We start with a spacer that fills the weight. Why do you need this? Maybe it's just to like give that space here. But okay. And then we create an orbiter. We give it a position. So orbiter edge dot top makes sense. Alignment dot start, that makes sense. So that's how we get this up here. It's orbits on the top and it's aligned to the start. And then that's got our search bar. Um, let's look at the orbiter composable real quick because you can control Z with orbiters. Um, I don't know what you mean by control Z. Oh, like the depth of the orbiter. That's a good question. We can look at it in a second. I actually want to click into this because before I move on, let's look at this. So we've got an orbiter, which is top, and it's got the search bar, and then we've got another orbiter at the end, which is the environment controls. Um, so I notice environment controls is different based on the um, like which mode you're in, which we're going to look at in a sec. But I'm also curious how. So if we're always calling orbiter, what does it do if it's not in spatial things? Does it just not do anything? How does that work? Like what I mean is, so here, it obviously does not orbit, even though it's calling the orbiter composable. So I'm guessing that if we dig deep enough, we could see that orbiter, I see, it is literally that. So it checks if the spatial UI is enabled, it does this positioned orbiter with all that data. Um, else if should render in non-spatial, it does content. Oh, that's good to know. So this would be, I imagine this would be for if we want an orbiter, but like only when we're in XR scenarios do we want this orbiter. We could include that information. But otherwise, in something like this, we still want that content. It would just be rendered differently. But let's look at that real quick. You mentioned the Z thing. So we've got position, offset, alignment. Orbiter settings is probably what we want to look at. Oh, nope, that's just that one. Um, let's look at orbiter shape. It's probably in spatial shape. I don't know. I think as far as height, the answer is yes. We can control that as if it's any other component. I thought in some of the demos that they showed us last week that there was the idea that you would have a sort of different Z index. So their example is like a pop-up menu. Instead of being like a drop down that's in the same pane, it would pop up towards you and it would be like its own thing. And I'd imagine you could try to do that with an orbiter as well. Um, right, like things attached to the main pane or something. Yeah. I thought, I think you're right. I just don't know. Could it be related to the offset? Um, oh, wait, what is this? So orbiter data has an edge offset, represents the offset of an orbiter from the main panel. Can we do something with that? Orbiter offset type indicates that the offset is relative to the outer edge of the orbiter or the inner edge. Maybe. That's a good question. I feel like it should be something we can do, but um, I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe that's something we could figure out when we're done looking at it. Um, so that's an orbiter. I think the search bar component is then. Oh, it is a little different. There is a little bit going on here. So it does do if UI is spatialized. Oh, if it is, it adds a spacer. Okay, this just looks at, this doesn't really do much other than it tweaks the UI a little bit. I don't love that. I feel like that's not very like adaptive designy. Um, like it's an interesting question, like that I think people are going to be faced to think about, which is like, how much should an individual component know about its display situation? So like, should this search bar know whether it's in spatial UI right now? And that's a good question there. It's like sometimes we won't be able to avoid that, right? Like some things are going to be full space specific experiences, but other times it should just be adaptive and not care. And so I wonder if like also surface is that just I still don't know what the heck this spacer does. Because the surface, I think, acts like a box, so I don't know if the spacer does anything. Well, it's a width. So is it what's doing this space right here? You know how we can find out? Let's just test this. Where's this 208? Okay, what if we replace this 208 with 100? And then let's run this again and let's see what's different. Hi, Kirby, how are you? Oh, let's get rid of the physical, or the phone. I think that was it. I think it was changing that width there. So, okay, so I guess that's like kind of understandable. Um, I actually don't think the spacer does anything as I'm looking at this code though, because it comes from this padding too. That's just its own thing. Also, I wonder if there's a way to restart but stay in full space mode, sort of thing. Are we good? Did I break it? How did I break it? Also, how do I close this? I can go to home. Doing Guardians of the Rift, definitely fun stuff. I'm doing good. Playing with a VR headset emulator right now. And I've broken things, I guess. Wait, so what the hell? So I all I did was comment out these two spacers that I don't think we need, and the app stopped working? Okay, now it works. Okay, yeah, the spacer was useless. But that's fine. That's I can ask Patrick if there was a reason that was there. Maybe there's something I don't know, or maybe it was from testing, but um that's the search bar. Environment controls are fun to look at because I noticed these were different. So um controls for changing the user's environment and toggling between home space and full space mode. So if we aren't able to access the session, these buttons wouldn't work and shouldn't be shown. So we get the activity, and then we get the local session. So this is another good one to know. So local session is coming from the XR library, which has information about um, the Jetpack XR session, which has things like their current spatial environment, their current spatial capabilities, um, all sorts of fun stuff that we haven't looked into yet. Um, so, but basically, we're checking if this session is not null, which basically means like, are you on an XR enabled device? Is more or less what this is. Um, because if you're not, then none of this matters. So that's why on the phone, um, this little button, um, I wonder, there's probably keyboard shortcuts for these. Um, this little button doesn't exist on the phone because there's no need to go to full space mode. Um, so is spatialized, is spatial UI enabled, environment controller, remember activity, session. Okay. Load the model early so it's in memory for when we need it. Ah, there's a lot going on here. So this is loading that. Hey Vad, how are you? Hope you're having a great time. This is that Green Hill environment that we talked about in the beginning. They load this early on, environment controller, load model asset. I wonder if there's something to prevent this from like running every time environment controls are rendered. Like, I wonder if this should have been inside a launched effect or something like that. Um, then we've got our surface, which is a circle shape. Is that? Oh, that makes sense. Um, which is a row. So if UI is spatialized, we have multiple buttons. We have our set virtual environment button. So if we're setting a virtual environment, we request that custom environment. Makes sense. Or we have our pass through button, which is request pass through, a little vertical divider, and then request home space button. Otherwise, it's just full space button. All that makes sense, and those are all just um, icon buttons. All right. Yo, Vad, thank you for the follow. Welcome in. Um, so is that Vinny? VAD, I'm guessing. But if it's not, I'll just call you Vad because that's the Twitch thing. And that sounds sick. So that's a walkthrough of the sample app. Um, oh, nice. Welcome in. We were just talking about how awful, no, I'm just kidding. How great all of this is. Um, and walking through the samples. I wish there was one thing I don't love, and I don't know if there's like a solution to this though, is that every time I go into full space mode, it becomes like way too big, and then I have to pan over to change things, which I guess like is kind of the point that full space mode should be a big screen, but on an emulator, it's just not like the most useful thing. But so we walked through the sample app, we talked about spatial panes and orbiters and all that fun stuff. So now the question is, um, what do we want to do next? So I hadn't planned on taking, I hadn't planned on tonight being one where we modify an existing app to use XR, but it could be. Um, but I think there was a question earlier of like um, stuff with orbiters. So controlling the idea of like controlling the z index, like the depth or the height. And so maybe we could try to figure that out. So we could play around with that with like this search one. So let's see what we can do there. So let's go to. I don't want to. I'm just gonna make a new branch for this real quick. So I don't change anything in the main. I'm not that I'm using. I'm only using a fork, but still, whatever. Anyways, um, let's go to search bar. Um, it's not here actually. It's here where we set the orbiter. So we've got a position, which is orbiter edge, top, bottom, start, end. All makes sense. Um, we've got an offset, which is 96 dips. So if I wanted to overlay stuff, actually, this is a good question. I have a lot of questions actually. Can I? Well, let's see. Let's imagine I wanted to overlap this. Like what would happen? Um, I think this offset is in dips in this one. Well, it could be thing. So I don't know. What if we did like negative 96 dips? Let's just see what it would look like. This is trial and error. This is how we learn stuff, right? Okay, so that does have it go below. A little too far below. Um, half of that. Okay, I need to go even low. Oh, well, I guess that 96 is probably a magic number that includes the height of this plus the padding, And so that's why I'm overcompensating. So let's say, I mean, if I put 0, wouldn't that just like align it to the top? That's exactly what it would do. So if I wanted that like partial offset, we would raise this, but just a little bit. Like, so instead of 96, what's half of 96? 45 plus 3, 48. So it's like not obvious here because they're both black, but you can see like, yes, now the orbiter is like on top of the other one. But you're right that there's no like elevation. I also wonder, so I wondered if there was a way to like drag components. And maybe that would be like where the other subspace comes in. Um, would they cast shadow onto one another? No, like I think it that's what I would have expected, but um if the background was white, I suspect not. I would also suspect no, but I mean we could find out. Early days, exactly. Um, we're gonna find out. That's what we're here for. Okay. Um, you need to define where the light is coming from in the passive versus simulation. That's also a good point. It would make sense that the shadow wouldn't happen like automatically. Also, I'm not sure what I did to not make that. It's probably on its own thing. Um, oh, because I modified the text, not the. Oh yeah, because the text pane is its own surface. Um, it was cool though. I thought there was. So we can control that offset though. That answers the one question. Um, I want to understand the difference between outer and inner. So an outer offset represents the offset of an orbiter from the main panel relative to the outer edge of the orbiter. In outer edge alignment, the outer edge of the orbiter will be offset distance away from the edge of the main panel. But inner is the same, but it's the inner edge. Ooh, so this is actually a good point. So if I understand this right, so let's talk about this offset. So we said that this 96 was we believed to be a magic number that was the height of the search bar itself plus whatever padding we were trying to add. Um, and I wonder if that's the point because we're doing it from the outer edge. But if I interpret the inner edge of the orbiter as the bottom, does that mean if I do something like offset being inner, 16 dips, would that have the same would that have the same effect? Nice. Okay. So that's actually a good thing to note then. That I feel like I guess it could go either way. But if you want to space the orbiter away from the container, I feel like you'd want that inner edge offset. But if I really did care about the sort of here, the top position of the orbiter, that's where I would want an outer edge offset. That's really helpful to know. I'm glad we discovered that. Um, I wonder if you can do that with panes as well. So what I'm thinking is like, I'm gonna make this note for myself. Is one closest contact furthest. Just writing that down for myself. Um, so because I'd seen examples, well, I guess you typically wouldn't necessarily want overlapping content. In some of the XR samples, I saw that, and it made it look a little more polished when everything was together. But I guess if you do overlap content, if you overlap panes, you risk cutting off content, which is probably not what we want to happen. Um, that's pretty cool though. Um, that we learned something about the orbiters. Um, we went through this faster than I thought. So do we want to? I guess we could talk about some of the material design stuff, or try to do. I have more exciting things I want to do on Monday, but we can still do some mildly exciting things tonight, I guess, um, to try this out. So I'll also pause there, in case I like record this, because that's a great starting point to review, um, basically what exists today.